All right, here we go. Let's continue. So if they find, or in this case with the echinacea study, they found no difference between the control and the experimental, then they would reject the hypothesis. And again, if they reject the hypothesis, that does not mean that the experiment was pointless. They still learned something. They learned that echinacea was not effective. Now, again, the slide before this, right? They can make revisions, right? Try to further refine a hypothesis, make new and more specific testable predictions. And usually that's what happens. And with the echinacea study, what happened was they were thinking, how about dosages? What if we up the dose of echinacea? Does that make a difference? And it seems to make a difference, right? Depending on the dose and the amount and how long that they're seeing some differences. So again, getting back to science is trying to get to know the truth. Okay. So take home message, and like I said, I wasn't going to read the take home messages, so I'm not reading it. You guys can pause the video, you can read it. What's the take home message? Now, hypothesis versus theory. Okay, hypothesis, again, is an answer to a question. A theory in science, a theory is not, ooh, I think, ooh, I don't know. In science, a theory is a hypothesis that has been tested over and over and over again, and we're accepting it as true. So it's a very well-tested hypothesis and that we believe is true. So it says a hypothesis for a natural phenomena that's exceptionally well supported by the data. So for example, the germ theory or evolution. Or the atomic theory. These are things that over and over and over, have been shown to be true. Okay, and the scientific community accepts them as true. The scientific community are pretty skeptical. We're a bunch of skeptics, which is a good thing, right? Because we're like, show us that this is true. Show us that this is real. All right. A hypothesis that has withstood the test of time and is unlikely to be altered by any new evidence. So common elements to an experiment. So the treatment. So in our echinacea study, the echinacea would be the treatment. Experimental group, they get the treatment. Versus control group, they're what we compare to. We have to compare it to something, and they would get the placebo. Variables, the variables in your study. So in the week 2 of our Canvas shell, we talk about the designing of a good experiment, and what are the control variables, what are the experimental variables, what are the independent and the dependent variables. Okay, so make sure we'll take a look at that. So controlling the variables, most important feature of a good experiment. The attempt to minimize any difference in control group and experimental. So, for example, with the echinacea study, we want everything between the control and the experimental to be the same. So couch potatoes, smokers, healthy guys, stressed out guys. However we talk to them is going to be exactly the same. We don't treat the control group different than the experimental. Everything's the same except for what you're testing. And in this case, the control group's getting the placebo, the sugar pill. The experimental group is getting the echinacea or the treatment. Because there's a placebo effect, right? A phenomenon in which people respond favorably to any treatment. And so we want to minimize that, right? So we give them something, we don't tell them what it is, and we're trying to get to know the truth. And then we compare the two groups. So blind experiment, I mentioned that in the previous video. A blind experiment would be that these test subjects don't know which group they belong to. So the experimental subjects do not know which treatment they are receiving because we want to try to minimize that placebo effect. Double blind is even a stronger experiment. The test subjects and the experimenters don't know which group who belongs to. Why would we do that? Well, again, we're trying to minimize anything that would get in the way of the truth. We're trying to minimize any biases. We're trying to minimize any interactions that might mess with our data. So hallmarks of an extremely well-designed experiment: blind, double blind. So sometimes when you hear of an experiment and it's a double blind study, that means it's really strong experiment. randomized. So this idea of who they picked out of the group, so random sample of the population for one group, random sample of the population for one group. Again, this helps make it a better study. All right, so take home message. Repeatable experiments increase our confidence. So if we get a result, right, and if we do the experiment again and we get the same result, and we do the experiment again and get the same result, then that helps us say, yes, that is the truth. It increases our confidence. Here, can science be misleading? Of course it can, right? Scientists are humans, just like, everyone else. Their biases get in the way, just like everyone else. So we try to minimize our bias the best that we can, and a well-designed experiment will help us get there. So we've got to watch out for our biases. Can scientists be sexist? What do you think? Yes, of course they can. Again, they're human. In this, and not that sexism is a human trait. It's just humans are humans, and whatever issues they have, of course, they bring to their work, right? So that's possible. So here, they show, a published study about when reviewers know the sex of the author, only 23% of the papers are published by women. When the reviewers don't know the sex of the author, 31% of the papers are published by women. And then we get to, 23 and 31. Those are pretty close numbers. So are they different? Okay. Or are they the same, really? Is the difference due to chance alone? And that's where we use a branch of math called statistics to analyze our data, and that's going to be coming up. So scientific thinking can help us make wise decisions, of course. So here's a person looking at food labels, and if you know something about carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, maybe you would have better health choices. Or talking about, let's say, dehydrogenated fats, versus hydrogenated fats, is there a difference? Visual displays of the data can help us understand and explain phenomena. Yes, of course. So many times in scientific articles, you'll see bar graphs, because if you could see it, then you're like, oh, there's a big difference here or there. Or here we have line graphs, right? So yes, to look at the data, or pie charts, yes, to look at the data. Visual displays, yes, we can see that. Statistics, so this branch of math where we can analyze our data. So with the echinacea study, for example, if we're looking at the control group versus the experimental, and we're wondering, is it really different? Well, statistics helps you analyze the two groups, and it helps you say, is the difference due to chance alone? Well, they're two different groups, so they're going to be different. But how different are they, right? Then the difference that you see, is it due to chance alone because they're different in the first place? Or is it due to the fact that echinacea really did help decrease the duration and severity of the cold, right? So statistics helps us analyze our data. So a set of analytical mathematical tools designed to help researchers gain an understanding from the data they gather. So for example, let's pretend you're a Martian and you come to this planet and all you see are these two people. If all you see are these two people, right, then you might conclude that women are taller than men. But if you saw a lot of people and you actually measured them and so on and so forth, then you would see the truth is men are taller than women, right? So actually, this is not necessarily with statistics. This is talking about large sample size. So if you have a larger sample size, you probably are getting a better picture of the truth. Okay, like of the population. So here it says drawing conclusions based on limited observations is risky. So in reality, if we took 100 men and women or 1,000 men and women, then what we would see is The average female is 5'4" plus or minus 3 inches. The average male is 5'9" plus or minus 3 inches, right? Don't get fooled. Making one or two observations isn't enough to draw general conclusions about natural phenomena such as height. So measuring a greater number of people will generally help us draw more accurate conclusions. Pseudoscience, that word pseudo means fake. So fake science can be misleading. Anecdotal evidence can obscure the truth. What's anecdotal? Anecdotal means someone's story, like one person saying something, and they might say, I took echinacea, it worked, so it's going to work for you too. That's anecdotal evidence. Pseudo is false science. And you bet there's a lot of pseudoscience out there where people pretend, make it seem like it's scientific and it's a truth, and it's not. Okay. We see that all around, right? So that slide that we just saw here shows the definitions of pseudoscience. Anecdotal observations. Here we can look, for example, we see this in marketing a lot, right? Here, revive, right? Vitamin water. So you think, oh, I'm going to drink this, I'm going to feel better, right? Whether it's based on real science or not, it's pseudoscience. Pseudoscience can manipulate you with deliberately misleading claims or with scientific sounding language sufficiently ambiguous to avoid charges of deception. 4 out of 5 dentist surveys recommend sugarless gum. If you saw that, you'd think, wow, a huge percent of dentists feel that sugarless gum is better. But who's to say they didn't just talk to 5 dentists and 4 out of the 5, right? Because that would be true, that 4 out of the 5. But it doesn't mean that it's, something percent, that it's a really high percent. How do they know what they know? Okay. Here, this idea, this was based on poor science, right? The MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, that there's a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. In reality, it was based on a really poorly designed study. The study only had a very small group of kids. I think it was like 8 kids. And they were showing kind of signs of autism before the study. And to kind of rub salt into the wound, what ended up happening is they found out that the guy who did the study was actually working on a different vaccine. So he was kind of externally motivated to get the results that he got. Unfortunately, it was published in a scientific article. So the reviewers did not do their job well. And unfortunately, then the media got a hold of it. And then, of course, they would advertise it, right? Because it's like, oh my gosh, MMR vaccine and causing autism. And unfortunately, it was based on poor science. And then many people stop vaccinating their kids, when in reality, vaccinations are really important. Vaccinations actually help kids. So here it says, a misguided fear of catching autism has caused some parents to decline immunizations for their children, when in reality, we know that's not true. So here's this campaign trying to tell people, immunize for good, respect the facts, protect your child, immunization, immunize for good. Right. So pseudoscience, anecdotal observations often lead people to believe that links between two phenomena exist, when in fact there's no such link. Lastly, what is life, right? Life, biology. Bio means life, ology, the study of. Biology is the study of life. And so what is it, and what are some common themes? Here we see a biologist amongst all these specimens, right? On the road to biological literacy. Hopefully, again, this is a general ed class. We're trying to get to biological literacy. What are the major themes in biology? Here they are. And we're going to be talking about all of these in this semester. Chemical, cellular, energetic foundations of life. So chapter 2 is about chemistry. Chapter 3 is about cells. Genetics, evolution, behavior, we're going to talk about all of that. Genetics, we're talking about passing on traits from a generation to generation. Evolution, talking about populations changing over time. And behavior, is there a link? Diversity and unity of life. So all these different living things, yet they have all these commonalities. And lastly, ecology. Eco means the house. That's so the study of the house, the environment, subtle, important links between organisms and the world they inhabit. All right, we are done with chapter 1. Make sure you do your homework and